Astronauts to the moon.
Ignition sequence start. 3, 2, 1.
Houston, we have a problem.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue.
What you're seeing here is a mirage.
What's going on, everyone? It is Jaron from Jeranism, back with another live video for you today. Thank you for joining me wherever you might be. Shout out to everyone in the chat, and hello to everyone. Welcome to the show. I've called it today, obviously, and Observably, which is the catchphrase or moniker for my guest this afternoon. I'll let him tell you where you can find him now and where you should be able to find him soon. Welcome to the show, Nathan Oakley. Nathan, how are you, my friend?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much indeed for having me, Jaron.
Yeah, anytime. What I kind of want to do with my channel, and I've done this, you may have seen Ranty's show that I did with him last week, is I want to kind of provide a platform for people that I think are doing good work that maybe aren't getting as many subs as I think they should. And yeah, to have these little short hangouts and kind of highlight some people's work, talk and just kind of show people, the other options that are out there, the other channels that are providing good observations like Ranty is. And for me, I've learned so much from your popular Flat Earth Debate show. I take a walk in the morning about 2.5 miles, and it was just great to have something that I knew was going to be there. It just became kind of a regular day thing for me. I didn't participate much because I was just listening as I walked, but it taught me so much. And so devastating was the, these fallacious copyright strikes that you got. Can you tell everybody what happened to your channel? There might be people out there that haven't been able to find it. Kind of let us know what you were doing there and then what happened and what's the outlook going forward.
Well, initially it was a community guideline strike that sort of forced me onto the second channel. And then over the Christmas period, I'd put up a load of premieres just to play out while I was with family and such over Christmas. So I didn't actually know this was happening. It was happening to the premieres. And obviously, if you're not monitoring them live because you're having Christmas dinner, you're not going to pay attention to receiving bogus copyright strikes. But over the course of about, a month, I received 19 copyright strikes against material that was my own. And I'm pretty fussy. I get caught out occasionally with material that's not my own, with people that come on the show. But other than that, I'm very fastidious about not having copyright material, not using music that's not my own. I have in the past on previous videos, which were also amongst some of the videos that got struck, but they have started to lapse. So I am slowly starting to regain control of my channel. So hopefully this will also sort itself out in the fullness of time. But so that's what's currently the situation. I can't really do a great deal at the moment. So if people are wondering why there isn't a great deal out, other than my first plug, so on my second channel. So while this was happening and I did know about it, I started to put out some old debates. I put about 100, so that there was literally 3 months worth at the exact same time slot, but on my second channel with some of the older debates covering the Isle of Man, which we coincidentally covered with you. That was probably the last time we spoke, actually. But yeah, so covering the Isle of Man. So they still go out at the same time slot. But that channel also received copyright strikes, as did all of my channels. But fortunately, I'd had the foresight to actually get them out there, premiered, set up, ready to go before any of this happened. So they still continue to go out. And that is still the case. So that channel is called Nathan Oakley. And that's my second channel, where I get moved if we have things like this happen on the debate, which often does happen. So I'm not going to lie, this isn't the first time this has happened. It probably won't be the last. Not exactly the same, but similar things have happened to the debate. And anybody who's kept up with the Flat Earth debate will know that this is fairly par for the course. It's a little bit out of the ordinary, probably a bit more extreme than some of the other examples. Right. But there we go. I kind of anticipate this sort of thing happening because it's controversial. I'm sure you'll agree.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it'll be good to get you back now. Stop me if I'm incorrect, you have 3 channels, right? So you have Nathan Oakley 1980, then you've got the Nathan Oakley, and then you also have one called Oakley Chord, correct?
Correct. So Oakley Chord is typically used to actually stream. So it's where the actual hangout that I have is hosted on Oakley Chord, which is actually my oldest channel. So that was set up in, I think, 2006 or 2007, something around there, and has mainly got hi-fi videos on. But that is also a channel I will use to put material up and have done in the light of what's happened recently. So it's probably my least subscribed to, despite being my oldest channel. But yes, Oakley Chord is my third channel, if you want to look at it in that way. As I said earlier, Nathan Space Oakley, or just Nathan Oakley, is my second channel, and that's actually a good channel. I should really mainly plug my main channel, but the Nathan Oakley channel gets the pre-show and the uncut show. So what I found was that while I was doing the debates, people would join before the show started live, and they'd start maybe a really good conversation about something, but it wouldn't reach anybody. It'd just be discussed amongst whoever's joined the panel first thing before we've started. And that really kind of upset me. So I started to record it. I thought, right, I'll just start recording immediately. And then it'll be a bit boring. There might be quite a lot of dead air. But occasionally there's a really cracking conversation. And that leads me on to the next bit, which is even better, which is the after show. Now, often the after show is even better than the real debate because obviously everything's really pepped up. Everyone's heated. Everyone's on edge. And then the show ends. So everyone breathes out, relaxes a little bit, and then they may be a little bit more loquacious than perhaps they might have been if they were on the show live. So you often get some really interesting conversations on the after show, and that typically goes out on my second channel, Nathan Oakley. But then, as you say, the main channel, the one where I've got almost 10,000, it'd be lovely to get to 10,000 off the back of the show. I doubt it'll happen, but that'd be absolutely fantastic. But
we can always try, right?
Popular YouTuber, as YouTube defines it. So 10,000 subscribers. YouTube gives you various other features which you don't get, which they, according to their literature, only give to popular YouTubers, which I'm not, at 9,500. But there we go. The main channel's Nathan Oakley 1980, and that's typically where you'll see the show going out live and any of the ancillary material, the little snips that I take out like you do with your clips, and any short videos that I make off the back of some of the discussions and interviews and all the other stuff. I've probably got 1,200 videos on that channel, so it's a fairly expansive collection of stuff to look at. And I've recently been putting on the interviews that I did maybe back in 2015. You were one of them, David Weiss, Patricia Steer, all the people I interviewed, Math Powerland. I've been putting onto the website, which is nathanoakley.com. So that's now got all of the debates, including the ones that were taken down fallaciously, and the interviews will be going on, hopefully, if I can keep my head down as much as I have been. I've been working very, very hard. I'm sure you all feel really sorry for me, but to get the website all looking sharp, along with a huge amount of help from various different people. So yes, so that's me. That's where you can find me, Nathan Oakley 1980, Nathan Oakley, Oakley Cord, and now, or it's live, but it's not really built yet, but sort of in the process of being built, is nathanoakley.com.
Sweet. That's awesome to hear. And yeah, so if everybody wants to do that now, like I said, one of the main goals of these little presentations is to help get some of these guys the subs that I think they deserve. So if you just scroll down into the description of this video, you will see 3 links right immediately at the beginning of that description to each of Nathan's channels. So if you're looking for good flat earth information and a good debate show, which is something that has been missing from flat earth, and something that Nathan kind of filled the hole, plugged that hole, and has provided a great service and a great show to many people. So go down there and click those 3 channels. At the very least, you want to be on the Nathan Oakley 1980. Make sure you subscribe there. Let's see if we can get him to 10,000. I'm not positive, but hey, it's worth a try. I saw that we got Ranty a few hundred. I think he went from 1,700 or something to 2,000. So that's kind of the goal, and get some people some good stuff to watch and some good channels to follow. So yeah, please right now, if you could, scroll down and hit those links and go subscribe to Nathan. While people are doing that, I did want to shout out just a few of the debaters, because I've enjoyed the show so much. So I'll miss a bunch of people, but Sleeping Warrior, obviously, Plain Truth is on there all the time, Ranty Flat Earth, Jose, JG, Soundly Killer Gonzalez, Chocolate Sane, Arwin. Help me out here with some people I'm forgetting.
You Plain Truth you've had already.
Said that one. Oop, did I lose you?
Yeah, my mind's gone completely blank. Why is that?
Well, there's so many different people, and I'm just calling out some of the flat earthers, but also I enjoy hearing Apollo, and I enjoy hearing some of these other guys that come on, and Rumpus. Some of those guys are enjoyable to listen to and to hear on a daily basis, and I kind of miss it. So that's why I wanted to shout some of them out. So thank everybody who joins that show. I know I've been on it a few times, but would like to get on there some more. Personally, I'm terrible at debating, mostly because I have this idea in my mind where a good debate. Let's say that you have a debate over a topic. Whoever wins that debate doesn't make that the truth. And so I've always kind of had that in the back of my mind. But after listening to the debate show, I've been able to reword some of the things that I say. And then there's, the repetition of the show. This is something that I don't know if people notice or whatever. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate that very much from Orange Super Chat. I will check, JBBBJBJB. Thank you very much. But one of the things that I find important is the repetition, and it may not be seen as important, but there's some things that have been said on the Flat Earth debates by Ranty, by Sleeping Warrior, by yourself, that at first I hear it, I'm like, what are these guys even talking about? That doesn't even make sense. And the next day it'll be said again, and I'll be like, I don't know about that. I still don't. And then I heard it a third day and a fourth day, and all of a sudden it kind of pushes its way through that wall that we all have built up in our mind. Sometimes it make things, I don't know, I hear the word impossible all the time, right? That's impossible. This is impossible. It's impossible that this take place. But people don't realize you have a phone in your hand that can send videos across the world in an instant. So there's a lot of things that people might think are impossible that I don't any longer feel that way. So I just love the debate channel, and that's why I wanted to call some of those guys out and make sure that people recognize that. The other important thing that I think is hugely important, and we're going to get into these right now, is what you call housekeeping. You want to explain to people what exactly housekeeping means?
Yeah, certainly. So just an overview, if you have no idea what the debates are. So the debate is an open platform, and essentially the show starts and there's a link in the description box for anybody, literally anybody, to join. So if you have a YouTube account, you can click the link and join the show.
Wait, even Red's Rhetoric could join if he wanted?
Even Red's Rhetoric can join the show should he choose to do so.
Okay, just making sure.
That's enough. He can come in and just start debating. But anybody, literally anybody, can join the show. And at the very start of the show, massive shout out to Sleeping Warrior, because this was in essence his idea. So YouTube, also shout out to him, was basically pointing out that around show 100, there's been 684 shows in total, but around a show 100, we started to sort of get the feelers out for certain things that we consider to be undebunkable questions, and the context of the question will make it sense in terms of how it's undebunkable when I go through them. But ultimately speaking, it's anti-brainwashing. You're absolutely right. You hear things often enough, and we'll come to science later, but if you hear something often enough, it becomes washed out. Its meaning becomes less impactful. And with the brainwashing that you experience in terms of the heliocentric system, there's certain aspects of it that are taken as read, even though they're ridiculous, like seriously ridiculous. I mean, I'm hoping, if it's okay with you, and with a bit of your help, because I've got to be honest, the debate wouldn't succeed without the people you've listed, without Arwin, without Sleeping Warrior, without Ranty, without The Plain Truth, without Eric, without all of these people. The debate couldn't take place because they assist us. We're a team. So I will do this now. So I'm hoping going forward that more people will contact me, maybe even yourself, to set up debates. So instead of it being an open platform, it's a closed platform for a given show at a set time. And I just moderate. In other words, it's a flat earth friendly platform that offers services that other sites that will not be named offer for a closed debate. But rather than there being only Globehead platforms where you can do this, and I'm sure there's flat earthers out there that will know this immediately as soon as I describe it, you get called out for a debate and you're told where to go. Well, in those situations, I would hope people could say, well, yeah, okay, I'll debate you on Nathan Oakley's channel and I'll moderate it. And then you've got a flat earther who's the moderator. Yes, just as biased as they have. And that has its advantages. But anyway, I digress. The point is that people can come on and they have offered up at the start of the show housekeeping, a series of questions that basically address some of the points that we are left with as a result of cognitive brainwashing. And it's a way of undoing those cognitions, because if you leave them out there vaguely, people won't necessarily get the point. But when you repeat them over and over again, and people do get in a flap about it and come on the show to say, how could you possibly assert that there's no curvature to Earth? And you say, okay, what do you think is curvature? And then you'll get presented with something that's being obstructed from the bottom up. And you go, well, I know what the word curvature means, and that is not curving. There is no curve in that picture. And they'll take you through a logical fallacy that starts with the conclusion, starts with you being on a ball, and then extrapolates it out to describe something being obscured as Earth curve. So the first question we ask on most of the debates, I'm pretty sure it's normally always the first question, any signs of curvature? Because Curvature is a really specific thing, right? We're supposed to live on a ball, and it's supposed to curve away from us in all directions. Do we ever see an example of curvature? No, never. The only time that someone will claim curvature, and I'm sure you can relate from Ranty's last show, is barrel distortion, lens distortion. That's it.
Yep, or obstruction, which is one that they all the time will call curvature, that all obstruction is curvature. So explain that a little bit.
Yeah, again, are you asking me to explain curvature as in obstruction from the bottom up?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I've heard you say recently, which is beautiful. There's so many little gems that I pick up from you. One of them, when talking about this angle of attack and things disappearing from the bottom, I heard you say the other day that if you were on the ceiling of a building, that the smoke detectors would disappear bottom first. And I go ahead.
It wasn't me that said that.
Oh, it wasn't you.
I can't remember who it was. It has been discussed on the show, and I may have hinted at it. I've said things like, yeah, it wouldn't matter if you're on the side wall or the top wall. But yeah, recently the guy who said it was the smoke detectors, I think it was actually Arwin. So you've got into the pattern, and Arwin's now broadcasting at a similar time to me. But I think that I'm going to give Arwin credit for that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So it wouldn't matter if you're looking at a limitation of the angle on the ceiling and the limitation causing the, let's get this phraseology right, the smoke detectors disappearing from top down, or a boat going into the distance with the floor being the thing that's rising up to your eye level. It makes no difference. It's absolutely correct. How does Arwin describe it? Even now I'm giving him credit. He calls it the optical slant, right? Well, yeah, you've got essentially the term the horizon rising to eye level, most people are familiar with at an instinctive level. You look out into the distance, depending on the clarity of the weather. When we're talking about long distance stuff, I'm talking in general. Yes, you can push this out further if you've got some better clarity. And maybe we'll get to that in terms of what they claim is a glow proof with the theodolite. We may not cover that, who knows. But yeah, you look out into the distance and you can see that the horizon is at eye level. Well, that doesn't alter as you lower your position towards the ground. The horizon will still rise up to the eye level of the camera. The problem is that depending on what you're looking at anything through, be it your eye or a small camera phone or even a P900 or even the Hubble telescope, everything has a diffraction limit. So there is a limit that the camera cannot resolve what it's looking at in the distance. Well, in the case of the long distance photography, that's also compounded by the fact that there are things in the near foreground, normally waves, that are going to rise up to beyond that midpoint of that camera. So therefore, that's the first, and that's been addressed from 2015. Everybody's aware of that. Right. It just doesn't do a good enough job of explaining the other part of what we observe, which is that the bottom of whatever you see in the distance, if it's being obscured, may have also been squashed into the horizon. And then more often than not, you have a combination of both things together. So you have that squashing, which is then subsequently hidden by whatever's in the near foreground, literally obstructing at the midpoint. So it's a complicated topic, the angle of attack. But ultimately speaking, there's one word that sums up all of it: perspective. That's all we're really talking about.
Right. And then one thing to do with the compression happening at the horizon line, or where we see the Earth meet the sky, is the issue with compression. And I heard it on your show one time, and I thought it was hilarious that one of the ballers asked, well, how come there's no compression left to right? Why is there only compression at this horizon point? Why don't we see compression left to right? So can you explain to people, because I think it's hilarious, what is causing the compression? Because I don't think if anybody asks why there's no compression left to right, then they don't understand why there's compression to begin with. Go ahead and explain that.
Sure. So I'll start with the left to right bit. So from left to right, you've got an infinite angle. So there's nothing limiting your angle when you look further to the left or further to the right. There's nothing stopping you. So whereas earlier I said it wouldn't matter if you were looking down a corridor and you were looking down the side of a wall, well, obviously then you do have something obstructing to the left and to the right, and you would have the same thing happen. But when you're looking out across the ocean, there is no obstruction. So yeah, you're not getting any limitation of your angle basically when you look left and when you look right.
Right. There's no ground in the way, except for, if you're talking about looking left and right, you've got completely 360 degrees of nothing getting in the way. The problem we have is when we're looking straight forward, if you're thinking 360 degrees on the opposite axis, the problem is that the ground gets in the way. So, and this is the compression that we see and what causes things to disappear from the bottom up. So, yeah, so the first thing for housekeeping is, evidence of curvature, which, people have tried to bring many. Do you have any examples of people that have brought different things that they're calling curvature, or you want to move on to the next?
I mean, yeah, we get it all the time. I mean, I'm quite brash with some of the ballers that are regulars, Tim Osman being the most recent victim. But ultimately speaking, if you are to see obstruction from the bottom up, I mean, do you want me, I know we're going to come back onto the angle of attack a bit later. Maybe I'll save it for then. But,
okay.
Ultimately speaking, I'll round this bit out before we move on to the next housekeeping bit by saying this. If you are to see obstruction from the bottom up and then assert that it is Earth curve that is causing it, you require the presupposition of Earth being a sphere with an R value in order to make out that it's an obstruction caused by Earth curve. It's like every single assertion that the Earth is a sphere ever. It starts with the presupposition that you are on a sphere. That's how they do it. It's not curving. You're seeing obstruction from the bottom up. And I will, just so it gets it in twice, detail it a little bit here. So as you look out into the distance, if you are looking at a boat on the horizon, you have a wider angle to the top of the boat than you do to the bottom of the boat. So the smallest of angle is obviously lower to the deck, closer to the thing you're looking over. That's where you have your most limited angle. Well, in the same way as if you were to push a Lego brick. So let's pretend it's something that's small so that it only has one angle. It doesn't have multiple angles. It still does. Everything's got infinite angles. But just for the sake of this example, a Lego brick on the horizon, if you push it further away, it gets smaller. Ergo, its angle decreases. However, if you're looking down something like a boat, the bottom angle is smaller than the top angle. So the effect at the bottom of the boat is the same as the Lego brick going further away. Its angle is smaller. And what happens when something's angle is smaller? Well, it's compressed. It's smaller in size. It's reduced vertically. So the same principle happens to a boat on the horizon. The top, where you've got a nice wide angle, will look perfectly normal. The bottom, where the angle is significantly reduced, will have the same effect as pushing something out further into the distance. It will squash. So Ranty, absolutely excellent, by the way. Big shout out to Ranty. Superb. Your discussion with him was probably the best presentation I've ever seen from him. It was excellent.
Yeah, he did great.
But he's loads of examples of this. And normally the globeheads just deny it. They just say they don't see it. There's blatant compression, red pill philosophy, the same principle applies. He's got some absolutely epic examples of this. He looks out with his P1000 at some flats, apartment buildings to you Americans, and the tops are nice and wide, the bottoms are completely squashed. Ranty with his Stenoline boat, the word Stenoline is still legible but completely compressed because it's in the most limited of angle. Well, as you push that boat a bit further out still, that most limited of angle at the bottom gets even smaller. Mm-hmm. And when it gets even smaller, it reaches what I vaguely mentioned earlier, which is the diffraction limit, the limit of resolution of the camera, the point where the camera can no longer resolve what it can see. Well, at that point, it disappears. So the bottom of the boat, the most limited angle of the boat, disappears first. That's a virtue of the diffraction limit and it being in the distance, not Earth curve.
Right. Have you seen the most recent? I know you watched the Ranty show, so I'm sure you saw it. Did you see the Red's Rhetoric and Sean Stuffblurred and those guys' recent evidence of curvature when they took a photograph from a drone of the horizon and then compressed the image and called that curvature? Did you see that joke?
Yeah, Ranty got in touch with me because typically Red takes his videos down, and Ranty called me all full of joy. Look what I've got! And he showed me, and I was just wetting myself. Ranty and I were in pieces because it's just an absolute joke. It's like that first grade flat Earth mistakes. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's terrible.
I thought these guys would be well past that, and it just shows you that they're not listening, they're not paying any attention, and they don't understand lenses, and they don't understand how the eye works, and they don't understand the lens of a camera. They just don't get it. And it was like, as soon as I saw that video from Ranty, I lost my mind. I was like, what the? I could go take a picture of a straight line, and if I take a picture of it from above and condense it, it'll show curve. Like, are these guys really calling that their evidence of curvature? So yeah, so the housekeeping item number one that has been unable to be answered is evidence of curvature. Let's move on to the second one that I always hear there's evidence of axial rotation. So yeah, tell us about that one.
Right. I mean, I'm hoping you'll invite me back because this show was intended to be a show on logical fallacies. And the axial rotation one is a fairly recent one for me, which I'm delighted about because it was one of the last things for me to tick off the list. And it was basically a misunderstanding of a logical fallacy that I just didn't get. I didn't understand how the fallacy worked, and it took Quantum Eraser to explain it to me in detail for me to understand how that fallacy works. Now, I've already said this before, so it's going to stand true for everything, but you have to presuppose you're on a sphere if you're going to be giving out sphere evidence. And axial rotation, if I formalize it into the fallacy itself, you'll probably hear what you've heard a million times before. So if I'm standing in the northern hemisphere, I will look above my head and I will see rotation of the stars around Polaris. Then I move to the southern hemisphere and then I see rotation of the stars in the southern hemisphere. How is that possible if we are not on a sphere? The only model that works on is a sphere. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I've heard it many times.
Okay, well, that's known as an affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy. So I'll detail it in terms of how that particular fallacy works, and then I'll go through it with the actual example that the globe heads give with the star rotations. So the fallacy breaks down as follows. If P, then Q. Q, therefore P. I'll give you an example that's not related. So if I eat 10 hamburgers, I am full. If P, I eat 10 hamburgers, then Q, I am full. So Q, I am full, therefore I just ate 10 hamburgers, even though I'm full because I'm drunk and I've drunk loads of beer.
Right.
That makes sense?
Absolutely.
So the fallacy is that one doesn't necessarily follow the other. There's another bit to tag on, so this gets a little bit more complicated. As I've just explained, you also require a second fallacy when they do this, which is begging the question, which is to say you assume your outcome. So they start with, of course, the assumption that you're on a sphere. If I am on a sphere, so we're already into a logical fallacy. We've already got someone placed on a model to do this example. So we're already assuming R.
Of course.
We're already assuming we're on a sphere. If I am on a sphere, then I will see star rotation. Yeah. So we've got if P, star rotation. And then we have the begging the question again in the northern hemisphere. So their example already has the outcome inserted into it. So you've got in the northern hemisphere. So I'm already standing on a sphere then. So this isn't an example that proves a sphere. I've just got to assume I'm on a sphere to begin with. And the way you catch this is the word hemisphere, because they insert it in there like it's acceptable to demand that you're already standing on a sphere. The problem with the example is that then they demand that you then travel antipode to yourself to the southern hemisphere to observe the second set of stars. Well, I'll ask you this question, Jaron. In relation to where you are now, where are the stars?
Well, they're certainly above my head.
And if you're in Australia, where are the stars?
Pretty sure they're above their head.
So, other than the demand from a globe head that you presuppose you're about to travel antipode to yourself to make the second observation, there is no proof that you are on a sphere in that assertion. It is the assumption that you're on a sphere coupled with an affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P. If I'm on a sphere, I'll observe star rotation in the southern hemisphere. So it's a formal logical fallacy coupled with a begging the question fallacy. It does not prove that you are traveling antipodal when you make those two observations. It just makes you assume it.
No, absolutely. Well said. And I've talked about it many times with the stars and how if you look north, that these, the stars are rotating. They're rising from your right, which would be the east, and setting on your left, which would be the west. And if you just turn around and face south, now all of a sudden the stars are rising on your left, which is the east, and setting on your right, which is west. And that is the opposite that they're talking about. And you say one thing is counterclockwise, the other is clockwise. So yeah, I totally know what you're saying as far as that goes. You have to do too many fallacies to get involved in that one. And that what Nathan was just talking about is us. We were going to do a show probably, I don't know, it's probably 2 months ago or a month ago, on logical fallacies, and we still plan on doing that, where Nathan's just going to point out some things that are said in the debates and then highlight the logical fallacy included. So we'll definitely do that soon, because I think that's very important. But let's go to the next one. One of my favorites, many people's favorites on the housekeeping list, and that is a gas pressure next to a vacuum. So, tell us about that one, or gas pressure without a container next to a vacuum. But Nathan, the problem with that for me is there's a gradient. What about the gradient, Nathan?
Well, the gradient's a straw man fallacy, so it doesn't actually address the problem to begin with. So to say you can't have gas pressure in a container, or how do you have gas pressure in a container? I forget how they exactly phrase it, but they're addressed to the question, how can you have gas pressure without a container, is how can we have a gas pressure gradient? Well, the antecedent in both scenarios is the same.
Right.
So gas pressure and gas pressure gradient both require the antecedent of a container. So that question doesn't actually address the housekeeping question. It's all they have.
Right, that's why they keep
up.
Yeah, they'll keep attacking you with that one and say, yeah, but there's a gradient. There's a gradient that gravity creates, and they don't seem to understand the very foundation of the question.
I mean, I can give you the answer if you like. I mean, up until now, this would be a fairly exclusive thing to give you, because John, Quantum Eraser, who gave me the vast majority of these arguments, I say gave them to me. A lot of them came prior to John, but he firmed them up and made me understand them better. So a lot of the logical fallacy stuff actually came from JLB, but I didn't necessarily tie it completely to all of the points that we are making. So anyway, I digress slightly. I mean, this particular proof, before I give you the answer to the pressure gradient bit, is the best, the single best globe debunking there is, bar none. Because everything, and I do mean everything, hinges around the vacuum of space. You name it, it's tied to it in the heliocentric bullshit world of spheres. So I'll start with your point in terms of, so yeah, this is going to get me in trouble, because John's argument is to say, don't tell him. It's a straw man. Why give him the answer to the pressure gradient part of it when it doesn't address the necessity to have a container? The antecedent for gas pressure being the ability to press on something, i.e. a container.
Right.
But we live in a dynamic system. So obviously at the ground level, you've got all of the things that produce all of the different cycles. So the carbon cycle, the hydrological cycle, all these things happen at the ground. That's where you have the most concentration of gases. Yes, it's going to dissipate towards the top. It's going to get less because that's not where they're being created. However, it doesn't matter how limited that gas pressure becomes, it absolutely and unequivocally still requires the necessary antecedent of a container to press upon. Gas pressure, surprisingly, requires something to press on. So the question in housekeeping is, how do we have gas pressure without a container? And as Jaron rightly points out, what is space? This region nobody has ever been to, this region that nobody is confirming or validating, this region that we are led to believe is a vacuum. Right? A vacuum? Well, we've got gas pressure. I'm breathing it right now. It's going in and out of my lungs. I definitely know that part is true. We definitely have gas pressure. The vacuum, well, I've never seen that bit. Right. And it's a second law of thermodynamics violation. Entropy take effect.
I was just going to bring that up. Make sure you talk about that, because people need to understand what the second law of thermodynamics is and how it's never been broken, and if they need to break it in order for them to answer this question. So go ahead and explain that.
Well, it's entropy. Hot flows to cold. Simple as that. High pressure will flow to low pressure. If you have a vacuum, gas will try to reach an equilibrium within whatever it is in, the container, right? The necessary antecedent.
Right. So
if you have, the MIT guy gave a really good example. So he's got a gas next to a vacuum with a barrier. And the moment you really remove the barrier, the gas instantaneously fills the vacuum. So that's precisely what would happen, as dictated by the second law of thermodynamics.
Right.
Now, this is a law. This doesn't require scientific validation. It requires somebody to show me it not working. Show me an instance where you can have gas pressure without a container. So to visualize this, because obviously at the moment we're contextualizing this around space, so that's a fairly big concept to wrap your head around. And you've even mentioned their only argument, their only straw man, which is the gas pressure gradient. But if you put it into terms that people can visualize like they would on a TV screen, and you visualize a vacuum chamber. So you've got a vacuum chamber, and inside that chamber, you've got a fairly solid balloon. In other words, it's not going to expand the balloon itself into the chamber. It's going to be fairly, structurally solid. And inside that balloon, you've got gas at a given pressure. And it's there, it's on a stick, it's inside the vacuum chamber. The vacuum chamber's turned on because it's a fairly solid structure. It doesn't deform too much, it expands a little bit, but ultimately it's there. Now, what you need as a globe head, if you believe in the religion of the space that is a vacuum, is to have that balloon inside that vacuum removed and still have that ball of gas remain a ball in the center of the vacuum, because that is precisely what the heliocentric model has. Right. It has Earth, this tiny little dot in a vast, enormous, never-ending vacuum of space. And that dot has got on the outside edge of it gas pressure, not dispersing, not following the second law of thermodynamics, not succumbing to entropy. Nonsense. You can't have gas pressure without a container. Now, why is this such a great globe debunking? Well, every single argument, Patricia did it with me the other day. She was like, oh, right, so that means that rockets don't work in space. I'm like, forget the rockets. You completely debunked the medium with that question.
Right.
The medium no longer is possible. Who cares about rockets in space? Space has been debunked. You can't have gas pressure without a container.
Beautifully said. And yeah, and even if you think of that video you're talking about, where we've got that professor talking about what happens when we remove that barrier, it doesn't matter if there's a gas gradient on the left side. When you move that barrier, it's going to dissipate into the vacuum. It's, what do they say? Nature abhors a vacuum. Everything's going to go towards it. Yeah. So yeah, well said on that one. Let's go to the next one. Let me see if I have it queued up here. So then we've got, the famous evidence of gravity.
Again, science, right? Mm-hmm. Wrong. So let's get some clarity first of all. Which gravity do you refer to?
Right. There's two. If there's many more than that, but certainly not the Newtonian gravity that we all learned in school, or most people learned about and think that's so perfect. There's also the Einsteinian bending of the magical medium of space-time that, again, no one's ever seen.
All right. I'll start this with a statement. The statement debunks both. There is no scientific evidence of gravity. None whatsoever. We have two different versions. One is the most familiar to people, which is Cavendish gravity. You refer to it as Newtonian gravity, but Newtonian Cavendish gravity, if you will. So Newtonian Cavendish gravity hinges around the Cavendish experiment. And the Cavendish experiment is not an experiment. It's not scientific. It does not follow the scientific method. It does not have an independent and a dependent variable. And if people, as they do, call it an experiment, as soon as they use that word, you can debunk it, because it's not scientific, it doesn't have an independent variable, and it doesn't have an observed phenomena. The whole point of the scientific method is to observe what we see in the physical and natural world. That is step one. Observe a phenomena. Well, the Cavendish experiment conjures the phenomena within the experiment. Well, the experiment stage is the last stage in the scientific method, not the first stage. So to conjure their phenomena being torsion bar twist, mass attracting mass, the cause being mass. So their hypothesis is ludicrous. If mass, then mass attracts mass. Well, there's no gravity in that, as was ably and excellently demonstrated to Phil, the physicist, by Anthony yesterday. It was absolutely epic. But yeah, so there's a bit of a cognitive break with a lot of the people of science, in quotation marks, when it comes to the Cavendish experiment, in quotation marks, because it's not an experiment. It does not observe a phenomena. It does not have a viable independent variable, and is very quickly ripped apart as pseudoscience. The point, to bring it down to a fairly easy to digest and understandable way, in science you are proving things by varying and manipulating a presumed cause of an effect. Your presumed cause being your independent variable in the hypothesis being actualized in an experiment. Well, the independent variable presumed cause should be the thing you think causes the phenomena. Gravity, right? No, they blame it on a concept, mass. Well, mass is a concept. Concepts don't cause things. You just insert gravity and call it the hypothesis, which is what happened yesterday, which was epic. So a hypothesis is no longer a scientific prediction, according to this physicist guy, Phil. According to him, it's actually the label of gravity. That's what a hypothesis is, right? No, wrong. It's a scientific prediction. It predicts the cause of an effect, and then you go and validate or invalidate that presumed cause with experimentation. Back to gravity. So in in Cavendish Newtonian gravity, they have this circus sideshow to prove gravity, which is called the Cavendish experiment. Lead balls in a shed, which they claim demonstrate mass attracting mass, their observed phenomena, which is conjured within the test itself. So it's not scientific, it is by definition pseudoscience. And moving on to Einsteinian gravity, that's pretty quickly dealt with. How are you going to vary and manipulate the bending of space-time? That's pretty quickly drawn a conclusion to that. You can't scientifically validate the bending of space-time. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, it's just a concept. It's just a story. And they've got the whole world believing it. So anything else on the gravity point?
No, I mean, it's been massively argued about, both in terms of the actual terminology and the colloquial terminology, because, you know, we have people like Arwin who want to label it as an aberration. So the actual questioning for it is on our side because of the terminology the globeheads use. They would call Cavendish scientific evidence, and they do, right, which is great. So now the question has just got rephrased because of all that argy-bargy between, let's call it the internal struggle of flat earthers with the concept of gravity, which again, I should really give a brief explanation for. But yeah, it's now the question is there any scientific evidence of gravity? As that is the standard laid down by them for this nonsense concept of gravity. So why not ask them for scientific evidence? They're never going to provide it. They'll just parrot Cavendish or quote Einstein, and neither fit the bill. So there's no scientific evidence of gravity. That's what we ask for. In terms of what is gravity, because ultimately speaking, there's going to be people out on your audience that are like, well, that's great, wonderful. What are we left with? You're just saying it doesn't exist, it isn't real, it's made up, it's a concept, it's not scientific. Wonderful. Well, in terms of what we actually have, I think Morgile many moons ago called it pressure density. Well, it's actually nothing to do with the pressure bit and just the relative density.
Relative density,
so,
yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it.
Precisely. So those two words sum up precisely what's going on. So when they describe 9.8 meters per second, well, they're talking about removing the medium and then measuring objects that have no relative density to compare to. Well, if you put yourself into a swimming pool, potentially, you float. Well, you're not going down, as they describe it. Your position is either neutral or you might be sinking slower, but you're not going to be dropping your position in the same way as you would in air. And the same applies for things like an anvil. If you put it in mercury, it'll float. Well, it's a very dense object, but relative to the medium that it's in, it's not. It's all about the relative density of whatever medium you're in. So they've just hijacked that and again inserted this presuppositional value of G. And then with that value, as ludicrous as this may sound, again, there may be people in your audience that don't know this, but with that tool, with the Cavendish experiment, apparently they can weigh every planet in the solar system. It's amazing.
It is certainly amazing. All done in the 1700s in a shed with a telescope, right, and a wooden shed. And yeah, it's insane that people have bought into that, but you guys have done a great job of exposing it. The next one is one of my favorites. I think it's missing a point, but I still like it. It's distance to the sun. The part of that I think should be added to that is the size of the sun, because really when you're talking about these lights in the sky, you need to know one or the other. You need to know the distance to this so-called light in the sky. You would need to know the size. And when you don't know either, then you start asking the question, where's the evidence for the distance to the sun? I still have not found any. What about you? What say you?
Well, no. I mean, the answer I get typically on the debate is there is no distance to the sun, and it's based on two presuppositions, one from Huygens and one from Aristarchus in terms of radius and Venus. So you've got a presupposition that Earth is a sphere with a given radius, and then you make a further presupposition that Venus is the exact same size, and then you apply Kepler's third law. So that gives you all of the relative dimensions, and then you just say Venus is the same size as Earth, and then that will give you the distance to the sun and the size of the sun. So you can just scale it. I know you've covered this before because you actually did the maths once, I'm sure, on a very good video you produced where you just showed that you could ultimately change the distance. Not only can you, it has.
I was just looking at the super chats real quick, and I do want to go back to this one from Carlos Pagan because this is where I struggle to not understand how people don't get this. The question is, how can the bottom and top of the boat have different angular size if they are both the same distance from the observer? And I thought Nathan just did a great job of explaining it, and obviously not. If we're still getting that question with the super chat, thank you very much, Carlos, for that. But let's just, before we move on, I just want to go back and hit that one more time. And I think the best way you described it, the Lego brick works well. But I think one way you described it was...
I'll have one more go.
Yeah,
so
sure,
if
please.
So if you're looking at a ruler in the distance, well, if you draw from your eyeball to the bottom first centimetre of that ruler, yeah, that will give you a given size of a given angle. Well, then if you draw two more lines to the top 10 centimetres of that ruler, obviously the top 10 centimetres of the ruler is a wider angle than the bottom 1 centimetre. So there is literally a smaller angle to the bottom of the ruler than there is to the top of the ruler. Oh, has everything gone wrong? Oh, hello.
I lost you. Sorry. I'm back.
Yeah, it's that.
Yeah.
Bottom of the ruler is smaller in angular size than the top. Simple.
Yep, and it's what, for me, it's whatever one is closer to the line, the ground, which is causing the compression, which is causing the disappearance, causing the obstruction. So obviously, the bottom of the boat is the part of the boat closer to the issue that's causing the observation. So yeah, let's continue on. Did we finish? Oops, I lost my page here.
Just before we do,
Yeah,
so
please.
we were on the sun, but I'll do one more shout out in that regard because he did a miles better job than me. He credited me and did a better job than I did, which was Red Pill Philosophy. So at 27 minutes in his video called Flat Earthers Humiliate National Geographic, he does a much better example with great pictorial examples of exactly what I have just explained. So massive shout out to Red Pill. You did a far better job than I, even though you credited me. So 27 minutes, his video is called Flat Earthers Humiliate National Geographic Humiliated by Flat Earthers. So check it out. He's got a visual demonstration of exactly what I've just described. He goes through it verbally. Big shout out to him. Red Pill Philosophy. So yeah, distance to the sun. Maybe I normally lean on Anthony for this, actually, Jaron. So if you can talk about Huygens, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, the problem is when we talk about the distance to the sun is when you go back and you try and find where they first got this, and all of a sudden it comes into play with, they say, oh, well, there was the transit of Venus. You're like, oh, the transit of Venus proved the distance to the sun? Well, yeah, they don't tell you about the little factoid in there that in order to have that actually work, you need to first assume completely, because you don't know, you can't go there, you need to assume the size of Venus. And so somebody just looked in the sky and said, what if Venus is the same size as Earth? And again, we've already talked about the assumptions that you need to, the presuppositions that you need to hold to get to that point. Well, then imagine the presuppositions that you need to assume to say, well, that light in the sky that we see is the same size as Earth. And then all of a sudden, when you see that and you calculate the distance and you look at the transit of the sun, then they came up with the distance to the sun. Again, it's not proof. It's just simply a so-so story. It's a good story, and you can believe it if you want. But again, we go back and we say, well, where's the evidence to the distance to the sun? And they say, oh, well, if you assume that this planet, this moving light in the sky, is the same size as we've assumed the Earth is, then we can calculate the speed that it moves across the sun and get the distance to the sun and get the size of the sun. But again, the one thing missing from all this is evidence. It's just simply a story.
Yeah, exactly. There's no distance to the sun. They're not triangulating it. They're making an assumption that Earth is a sphere with the size that they state, and Venus is the same size.
Right, yeah, and a lot of people say, well, they triangulate this distance. It's all triangulated, and what they don't realize is you have to remember that the sun and moon are the same size or close to, almost exactly the same size in the sky. And so if you're just basically using triangulation, well, then you'll get the same distance for the moon or the sun. So you have to then have an additional fact in there, and that is the distance that we're talking about these items are. So again, you can make them the same size in the sky, and I did a video called Scaling Invariance, where I tried to show people that you can just change the numbers on all these lights in the sky, and everything still works. You just need to scale them correctly, meaning scale them equally. And in that case, then you can be talking about a sun that's 300 million miles away, and in that case, it makes it 3 million miles across. You can change it to whatever you want as long as it works in their system. So this is a big problem for me when I'm saying, well, where is the evidence to this distance that you're talking about? Because otherwise, we just look in the sky and see a moon and a sun that both appear to be the same size. Well, of course, that doesn't work in their model, so they've had to move the sun out 400 times further and made it 400 times bigger as well.
Yeah, that gets me. You see the sun in the sky, and it's fairly small. Realistically speaking, it's a small thing in the sky.
You can block it out with your thumbnail.
According to globe heads, it's absolutely enormous, right? It's 1,000 times bigger than us.
Oh, it's 867,000 miles wide is how big they say that the sun is. Again, you can cover it with your fingernail, simply putting your thumb up in the sky, and you can cover the entire sun. But you are forced to believe, or you've been told from the time that you first started going to school, that it's actually almost 1 million miles wide. It's 1 million times the mass of the Earth. It's, all these crazy numbers. And again, in their model, it has to be. It doesn't mean that it is. It just means that in their mathematical model that they've designed, it has to be those distances. But again, this is why we're asking for evidence to the distance of the sun, not what story you're telling people about the distance of the sun, which is what we get all the time.
We'll hopefully cover this next time we chat, but the whole concept of living on a sphere is also a logical fallacy. And in some ways, I think this is almost like a joke on us because we're taught it as a model. Well, if you look up reification fallacy, the example it gives is the map is not the terrain. To assert that we live on a model is the definition of a reification fallacy. So the model is just that. It's just a model. To say that because the model does something means the Earth is the model, right, is nonsense. We don't live on a model.
Or because the model works in this regard, then it means you must live there. That doesn't mean that at all.
No, it doesn't matter if they have an explanation with a spinning sphere that they can use to describe things. We don't live on a spinning sphere. The Earth is obviously and observably flat. To say that the model works, therefore the Earth's a sphere, is, by definition, a reification fallacy. We do not live on a model.
Yeah, and just because you can create a model around observations, that it doesn't make that the case. We don't live on a model. I think that's couldn't be said any better. Let's get to this last one here, which is a great one. Everybody laughs at this one. And I do sometimes say that David Weiss is the most hated man in flat Earth, but I don't know. You might be running neck and neck with him because I've seen just as many videos about you, calling you every name. You're a shill, you're this or that, and all making fun of your asking for the evidence of R. So go ahead and explain to people what you're asking for when it comes to evidence of R or the radius.
Well, the radius is a presupposition. So it is just as simple as that. There is no evidence of R. And the housekeeping question that precedes asking for evidence of R is asking for evidence of the molten iron core. So the Kola Deep borehole went down, 12 kilometers? About 8 miles?
Yeah, 8 miles.
And that's as far as we've got. We have absolutely no idea what is underneath our feet. None. 12 kilometers is as far as we've got. Yet when you go to school, you're taught that we have a molten iron core. Not only is it molten iron, it's beyond the Curie point and is self-perpetuating, the magnetic field that we all experience. You're like, how the hell do you know this? This is literally completely made up. Nobody's got the vaguest idea what's under there, but we're taught at school that it's a molten iron core. It gets worse, and we discussed this before the show starts, we're definitely not going to get time to cover science and various other things on this show, but we'll probably round out at the end of housekeeping, which is probably no bad thing. But we're talking about the formation of the molten iron core. Now, typically, when you've got something like the Cavendish experiment, you can at least pull something apart, right? There's at least a claim of science and a pseudoscience circus show to have a look at. In the case of the molten iron core, they've got just a just so story. And that just so story, children, is going to be told to you now. If you don't know it from school, you're going to hear about it again now. It will definitely be familiar. So we have all these planets and they're circling the sun on their various orbits. And one of them is on a very dangerous course. That planet is called Theia. And that planet is getting ever closer to the fledgling small dwarf-sized Earth. And eventually they collide. At a glancing blow, Theia obliterates into a million zillion pieces and floats around the newly formed Earth, which has luckily had a giant molten iron core deposited on it from this other very hot planet called Theia, which is then coalesced by virtue of this imaginary thing called gravity into the moon. So that is the story of the birth of the molten iron core. And it's true because they made it up themselves.
That doesn't make it true. I thought that's all you needed to say.
It's just nonsense. We don't have any proof of radius. There is literally just the mathematical presupposition, which came from Aristophanes and Aristarchus, looking at a light in the sky and saying, hey, that light's curved. Well, that must mean the Earth is a ball in space causing that shadow. And from there, the Earth was a ball. It's amazing.
Yep, sticks and shadows. And I did miss one. I totally messed up. I was trying to do these in order. But one that I forgot that you've been mentioning this whole time, let's just talk about it real quick, is the molten iron core. You just explained it. But again, we've only been 8 miles deep. And to claim that we've got this liquid iron, molten iron, flowing through, I did a little funny video that I sent you probably about a year ago at this point, just because I thought that one was hilarious, and pulled out a globe and drilled a hole in it and looked inside to see if I could find any molten iron core. But it was just to kind of show people that we haven't been there. Nobody's dug that deep. When they get 8 miles, all of a sudden the ground is too hot and too solid for them to even get these diamond-tipped drill blades through. So yeah, the molten iron core, which has been taught to everyone and continues to be taught to school children today, can't be proven. And yet they teach it as if it's part of the scientific method. And yeah, we did talk about that a little bit before. And yeah, I think we want to do another show soon again. And I always ask people to comment whether or not you like these little shows. And so far, everyone seemed to like Ranty's show. I'm sure people will like this one, so we can talk about it again. But when it comes to this idea of science and what meets the science definition, I think there's so much for us to go into there. I wouldn't even know where to start, because when it comes to this molten iron core, for people to be taught the scientific method in school, and so you understand, and it actually makes sense. I remember that being a big day in school when you hear that and you're like, well, that's definitely the best method to get to the truth. I mean, why would anybody argue with that? It seems like it is the absolute perfect way to get the closest you can to the truth. So you learn about that first. And then they start teaching you about these scientific subjects like the molten iron core, or like these lights in the sky. And since it's in the same class, it's in science class, you just learned about the scientific method, you just automatically assume that all of these things that we are learning must have gone through the scientific method, or else why are they being taught in science class? Now, that's not a question I asked for 30 years until after that point, because I assumed the things that they were teaching me had gone through the scientific method, and I think Nathan's show does a great job of proving that they don't. There is no scientific evidence for it. It's just a story. But go ahead and comment on the molten iron core before we finish off with the radius.
I'll tie it into exactly that, which is to say that it is not scientific.
Right.
It's a very narrow term, science, and hopefully when we next speak, I'll get to go through this in a bit more detail. But I'll even back up this stat, so I'll give you a stat. 99.9% of all claimed science does not adhere to the scientific method. Now, there's plenty of justifications out there for why they're not doing that, but that is the bottom line. There is a method, it is empirical, it's taught to you in 5th grade, it proves things. Now, as soon as you're taught that, you then immediately get told about nonsense, which is circus show parlor tricks. that aren't scientific, that aren't adhering to this method that you've been taught and is empirical, that does prove things, that does lead the way in genuine scientific discovery. We're told things like astrophysics is science. Wrong. It has one step in the scientific method: observe a phenomena. They're not independently varying and manipulating their presumed cause of their phenomena. They're just having a little look at it. Well, that's fine, so long as you don't declare it science. Because
right.
As soon as you do, it gets labelled pseudoscience. And this is not necessarily a one-man crusade, but certainly something I have a bee in my bonnet for at the moment. And, people get the the rough end of the stick from me for it. Unfortunately for me, when I was taught this information as a blank canvas by Quantum Eraser, little did I know that it's a double-edged sword. I'd be walking around chopping the heads off flat earthers as much as globe heads when they assert that they've got science when they haven't. So again, that's going to be something for perhaps another day. I know we're almost up on the hour. We're well over the hour.
Yeah, that always happens. But I do want to do a show on what is science and what isn't, and then also a discussion around that as far as fallacies go. The other thing, maybe we can do this show, again in a week or so, because I do want to discuss. Maybe we can do it just for real quick. Well, let's finish off the housekeeping first. So yeah, the last one that I did bring up, but I don't know if we covered it fully. It's just the evidence of the R value, which is the radius. Which, if we're a sphere, then there should be some measurement from the ground to the center of this presupposed ball Earth. But go ahead and explain that one, and if you did, just kind of round it off.
I mean, during the debate, we were finding ourselves arguing about terrestrial refraction, which is 7/6R. And this is the presumption that light can bend around the presupposed radius of the Earth. And ultimately speaking, the mathematics that they use requires the main point of all of the debating points, which is to say that for every sphere proof that is claimed, it requires the presupposition that you are on a sphere to begin with. And when they compare an actual photograph of reality, what we see when we take a picture of something in the distance, they will compare it to mathematics that does the exact same thing. It presupposes that you're on a sphere. Well, how does it do that? With the R value. The holy R value, praise be to R, because it must be there for them to make the presupposition that you're on a sphere. They tell you that you're on an Earth with a radius value. And that radius value is essentially presumed. There's no evidence for the R value. They can't prove the R value. They just insert it. And then they'll, in some of the more recent instances, again with Tim Osman, justify it by saying, well, it matches. I couldn't care less.
Right.
The presupposition of R only matches because you've hijacked perspective and you ignore all aspects of things in the near foreground being bigger than things in the distance. And then you claim that effect is actually because the Earth has curved away from you and the thing has dropped into that curve. Wrong. It's just got smaller. It's gone into the distance. That's called perspective, something that is absolutely and unequivocally ignored in their global mathematics that assume the cause, scientific sounding term we've got there, is R, Earth radius. Well, when they say something's obscured from bottom up and the cause is Earth curve, here is my mathematics, your reply should be, what's this R value? What's this number you have here? Where have you got this number from? Well, if you ask Mick West, he'll tell you it's from the standard model. In other words, he's just assumed it. That's what they tell us it is, so I'll use it. It's the standard model. Well, we don't live on a model, and to assume that we have an Earth radius is to assume we live on a sphere, and we do not. That's pretty much it for the housekeeping. It only took an hour.
That's good. No, I think it's great that people at least hear him and understand him. And I think the most intellectually honest position that you can take in this whole entire debate is exactly what I said your moniker is or your slogan is or something I've heard you say repeatedly over and over again, is that when we look at the Earth, and I don't even hear Globers arguing with this point very much, that the Earth is observably, and as Nathan says, obviously and observably flat. So at that point, if we were grown up to just accept the world as it's handed to us and see things that we can see and at distances that we can see them, and then we were given this other information, and if we were older and had a chance to actually consider what we were being told, then I think there would be a we'd be in a different situation. The problem with it is you are indoctrinated to believe certain things. Now, the most intellectually honest thing to do at this point is to step away from what you were taught, like I have, at least admit to yourself that the earth certainly appears to be flat. It's obviously and observably flat. At that point, if they want me to believe in other aspects of where I live, then it's their job to prove them to me. And I don't mean prove as in teach me about the scientific method and then sneak in a bunch of things and say after the fact, oh, those things, they did go through the scientific method. I'm talking about stepping away and saying, no, prove to me that there's curvature. Prove to me that there's a molten iron core. Prove to me that the radius of Earth. Prove to me that there's evidence of gravity. These are the things that they can't do. And so I think the intellectually honest position is to be in the exact position that I'm in and Nathan's in, to say, no, the Earth is obviously and observably flat until you prove otherwise. And that's what we're asking for and what Nathan asked for on this debate show.
Yeah, the term "what we see here is a mirage" is an assertion that what you are seeing, you're not really seeing.
Right.
You're seeing a slightly looming non-standard refraction hyena hologram of the Chicago skyline bent up at 7/6 of the radius of the presupposed Earth curve that you don't see and doesn't curve, coming back perfectly in scale into your line of view. That's what you must believe if you're on a sphere, that you're seeing a slightly looming non-standard refraction hyena hologram of the Chicago skyline. I see the Chicago skyline. The Earth is obviously and observably flat.
Right. And if it was a mirage, like I'm told, then it would have the aspects and the characteristics of a mirage, which none of these observations do. So you can't just tell me it's a mirage. Like, no, I know what mirages do. I have seen mirages. I can point them out quite easily. When you're talking about these buildings across Lake Michigan, or you're talking about Canigou from 1,000 feet at 175 miles away, or these other observations that Ranty's showing, these observations don't fit. The big one for me recently is this 13-mile test that was done at the Monterey Bay, where basically from 3 feet high, they were observing a mirror at water level 13 miles away that should be tucked behind at least a 40-foot hump of water. And it is impossible in everything that I've ever seen. I've never been shown anything that would lead me to a different belief here. It is impossible that you are able to see that mirror through some magical, call it non-standard reflection, call it looming, whatever you want. I know how mirrors work, and I know how reflections work, and that if there is something obstructing that mirror, you cannot see it, period. If there's anything obstructing it, put a cardboard piece in front of it, put anything in front of it, and if it obstructs the mirror from the observer, then there will be no reflection in that mirror because it's obstructed. So when we're seeing the reflection over 13.5 miles, and we're seeing it over a supposed hump that's supposed to be there, that is the kind of evidence that we're talking about, that there is no curvature. That's the evidence that certainly the Monterey Bay is as flat as can be. How are we seeing a mirror? They wouldn't have used mirrors to signal from mountaintop to mountaintop back in the war days if it wasn't something that could be controlled by saying, no, you have to be within this line of sight. You have to have line of sight to this mirror to see this signal that we're sending across this great distance. Well, we're seeing those signals sent across water when there should be a 30 or 40 foot. And think of how tall it is. 40 feet is a 4-story building. That's how tall this water mound should be between these two observation points. And it's not there. So, yeah, for me, the evidence is showing up in every possible case to prove that the Earth is not curved and that there is no hump, between those two locations. So, anyway, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and we can talk about this in a week if you want, is the Dr. John D. experiment. Because I like it, but again, the problem is with the wording. So, do you want to talk about that next time, or do you want to comment on it today?
Well, I'm in the middle of the back and forth with him about this exact subject. So, Effie Core and Adam Meakin and even yourself have had me fire breathing on them on this exact subject. And with Dr. John, I'm currently in the back and forth exchange about this exact subject.
Okay.
So,
well, let's wait, because what I want to do is...
Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I want to take a little more time to understand. I did read the email last week and then didn't respond to him. But then this morning I read some correspondence between you two, and I see your point. And again, I've got concerns when you're using lasers and things. But I do, I like calling these things observations. He wants to go out and make an observation across this distance. And so I'll understand a little bit better, and maybe we can do a show a week from today to discuss it, because I believe it's supposed to be done early February. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So yeah, Brighton Pier in I think it's mid-February thereabouts. It's not long from now, maybe 5 weeks from today. But yeah, it's being termed an experiment. That's my only gripe with it. It is an exceptionally good observation.
Right.
And we've just stated the Earth is obviously and observably flat. This guy wants to go out and observe it. Great, wonderful. Calling it an experiment. That's going to get me chopping your head off, unfortunately. But for the time being, no, I think it deserves more, so that it's not just around the subject we're just currently talking about, because it's
Good.
an exchange between John and myself, or Dr. John, I should say. It won't do justice to the subject if we just sort of lean on him and my correspondence between us. Whereas if I just do it specifically about the hijacking of scientific terminology rather than him, it's a bit less personal to him, if that makes sense.
Right. No, let's do it again in a week or something, so I have a little bit of time to look through it some more. I did see the website. But I don't know if the website's peer-to-peer. I don't know if that's the name of the test that he's calling it, basically across 9 miles. But again, we'll talk about that in the future. Just to round out some of these super chats to make sure, get them all. Renee Calosia, who is awesome, is very generous. Happy Flatter Day, a perfect day for mass globortions. He says, check out flatearth101.com for activism tools. So definitely check that out. If you're listening to the show, check out flatearth101 or flatearth101.com for activism tools. Somebody we read, JPBGGB, don't know who that is, but he says, I fart in YouTube's general direction. Thank you very much for that super chat. We read Carlos Pagan's. Gobsmacked asked, I'm wondering how you process many recent reports of magnetic pole shifts and the grand solar minimum's impact on climate change. Thanks. I'll have to think about that one. The magnetic pole shifts, again, these could be stories. I understand that they can measure these rocks and determine when these changes happened. Again, you have to believe the whole time frame that they've set up to believe in these pole shift timetables. Again, I don't think you can measure how old the rock is. If curvature is the default, then maps should have curvature accounted for already. Why do they account for curvature only when flying and sailing? We would drive over the same curvature with cars. Great point. Joey Bounds asks, can you take calls? My friend wants to debate. Have him email me, jeranism at Yahoo, and he can tell me a little bit about how much research he's done into this subject. I certainly do not want to debate anybody that's fresh, because they'll be just asking questions everybody knows the answers to, or pulling a Red's Rhetoric 3 years in move, which is taking photos from a drone and then condensing them and saying that that's curvature without understanding how the eye works or how any lens works. Love said, do you believe in the Big Bang Theory? I don't. No, I don't believe that everything came from an explosion from nothing, and every bit of matter that we see all came into existence instantaneously, and that these guys can rewind time in the sky and figure this stuff out. No, certainly don't believe that. Joshua Doyle said, defeat the pedophiles, hashtag Alex Jones, and defeat the globalists, hashtag Alex Jones. So thank you very much for all those super chats. I appreciate it. Also, I've been giving out my P.O. Box if people want to send me anything. P.O. Box 3044, Merced, California, 95344. Gotten a ton of postcards already and letters from people. Just some really nice things from people stating that, some people are saying they have a hard time talking to family. But it's just been great to get so many letters, and I've responded to those. And you should be getting those in the mail soon if you've sent me something and I've received it. So appreciate that a lot. Last thing I have for myself, as far as if you want to help this channel without spending any money, you can just go to jeranism.com, click the support tab, it drops down, hit Amazon, it takes you to Amazon, you do your normal shopping, pay your normal prices, and I get a small percent. Or you can start out at j.mp/JeranAMZ. It's on the screen if you want to do that one. I always have to say thank you to my patrons. They're the ones who allow me to continue doing this. So thank you very much. If you want to join them, patreon.com/jeranism. And then Nathan, just tell everybody once more time where they can find you and how they can support you, if that's possible. Do you have a PayPal link, that kind of thing? And then hope to talk to you again soon, but let's go ahead and round that out. So here's Nathan to tell you where you can find him.
Yeah, my main channel is Nathan Oakley 1980, which is all one word. I've just put a little hi with a wave in the chat, so you can click on the 3 dots and go in straight to my channel and subscribe to me there. or there's the secondary channel where the uncut and after show gets broadcast, which is the Nathan Space Oakley, or just Nathan Oakley channel. That's my second channel. And then Oakley Chord, OakleyChord, which occasionally has broadcasts from it, depending on what sort of trouble the show's going through at the time. But yeah, so my main channel, Nathan Oakley 1980, and Nathan Oakley are the two main channels. And then there's my website, which is only just been started, which is nathanoakley.com.
Beautiful. How about if people want to donate PayPal? Do you have a PayPal set up or anything like that?
In pretty much every video, every live stream, there's a link to my PayPal and things of that nature. And yeah, massive shout out to all of your Patreons and super chatters and all the people watching. Thank you very much for having me. It's been absolutely super. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope to do it again. So that was Nathan Oakley. This is Jaron from Jeranism, reminding you to do your own research, because when you do, you'll never again believe what you've been taught. Till next time, this has been Jeranism. Peace.